We walked into a church to steal the communion bread and burn it in the street, but before we even reached the door, something happened that dropped four of us to the floor. What power could make men collapse the moment they tried to touch the Eucharist? My name is Amir Rahman, and I am 31 years old. The morning I walked toward that church, the sky was gray and cold, and my hands were shaking, even though I told myself it was only the wind. I remember the sound of the church bells first. They rang loud and slow, deep and heavy, like metal hitting metal in the quiet air. Each ring echoed across the street and bounced off the tall stone walls around us. People were walking inside the church doors, families, old men with canes, children holding their mothers' hands. They looked calm, happy, peaceful, and that made the anger in my chest grow even stronger. Because in my mind, these people were doing something terrible. They believed a small piece of bread was holy, not just holy. They believed it was the body of Jesus. I had been taught all my life that believing something like that was wrong. My father used to say it was one of the worst mistakes people could make about God. God is one, he told me many times when I was a boy, and he is not a man, he is not bread, he is not an image. Those words had stayed with me for years. Even after we moved far away from Syria, even after I grew older and began to see churches in almost every city where we lived. The church in front of me that morning was called St. Matthew's Cathedral. It was tall, the stone walls were dark gray, and the roof rose high like a mountain. Two towers stood at the front, each holding a large bell. The doors were thick wood with iron handles shaped like crosses. Above the doors hung a large figure of Jesus. His arms were stretched wide, his head bent down. A crown of thorns rested on his head. Every time I walked past that church before, the image made me uncomfortable. But that morning I felt something different, determination, because I was not alone. Four other men stood with me on the corner across the street. Farouk stood closest to me. He was older than the rest of us, maybe 40, with a thick black beard and sharp eyes that always looked serious. Next to him was Yusuf, tall and thin, his hands tucked deep into his coat pockets. Hamdan stood behind us holding a small bag, and Bilal leaned against a brick wall watching the church doors carefully. We had gathered there only minutes earlier. No one had said much. The plan was already clear. Inside that church, during their communion, the priest would hold a tray filled with small white wafers. That was the Eucharist. That was what they believed was sacred, and that was what we had come to destroy. Farouk broke the silence first. "They will begin communion soon," he said quietly. His voice was calm, too calm. My stomach twisted slightly. "Remember the plan," he continued. "We go in quietly." Hamdan takes the tray. Amir and I help him move to the door. Yusuf blocks anyone who tries to stop us. Bilal waits outside. Hamdan lifted the bag slightly. Inside it was a bottle of lighter fluid and matches. "We burn it right here," Farouk said, pointing to the sidewalk in front of the church steps. "Let them see that their bread has no power." No one laughed. No one smiled. The air felt heavy. I looked again at the people walking inside. A small boy ran ahead of his mother and pushed the church door open. Warm lights spilled out from inside, glowing against the gray morning. For a moment I felt something strange. Not fear, something softer. A small thought that whispered inside my mind, "These people are not your enemies." But the voice of my father pushed that thought away. False worship must be challenged, truth must be defended. Farouk placed his hand on my shoulder. "You are ready?" he asked. I nodded. But the truth was more complicated. Part of me was ready. Part of me felt proud. I believed I was doing something bold for my faith, but another part of me felt a quiet knot forming deep in my chest. Still, I stepped forward. We crossed the street together. The church bells stopped ringing as we reached the steps. The silence that followed felt strange, heavy. The wooden doors stood open. Inside, soft music drifted through the air. A choir was singing. Their voices rose and fell gently, echoing through the high stone ceiling. The sound was beautiful. I hated that I noticed that. We entered the church slowly. The room was huge. Rows of wooden benches filled the center, stretching from the doors all the way to the altar at the front. Colorful light shone through tall stained glass windows. Red, blue, gold dust floated in the beams of light like tiny stars. The smell of candles filled the air. I had never been inside a church during a service before. It felt different from a mosque. In a mosque, everything is simple and open. Here there were images everywhere, statues, paintings. A large cross stood behind the altar. On it hung the same figure of Jesus I had seen outside. People were sitting quietly in the benches. Some had their heads bowed, others sang softly with the choir. No one paid attention to us. We moved toward the back row and sat down. My heart was beating faster now. The priest stood near the altar. He wore white robes with gold lines across the chest. In front of him on the table rested a golden tray. I knew what was on it: the Eucharist, the bread, the thing we had come to take. The service continued for several minutes. People listened as the priest read from a book. I didn't understand all the words, but I heard one name many times: Jesus. The choir sang again. Then the priest lifted the golden tray. My body grew tense. This was the moment. Communion. People stood from the benches and began forming a line down the center aisle. They walked slowly toward the altar. Each person reached the front. The priest placed a small white wafer into their hand. They stepped aside, bowed their heads, and ate it, one by one. Quiet, calm, reverent. Farouk leaned close to us. Now, he whispered. Hamdan stood first. He walked toward the altar like everyone else. No one stopped him. No one suspected anything. My palms were sweating. Farouk and I followed behind him. 3 steps behind, then 4. The line moved forward. Hamdan was almost at the front. The priest smiled gently as the next person stepped away. Hamdan reached the altar. The tray was right in front of him. Dozens of small white wafers rested on it. For a moment, everything felt slow. The choir stopped singing. The church fell quiet. Hamdan's hand moved toward the tray. My chest tightened. Farouk whispered under his breath, "Take it." Hamdan grabbed the tray. Gasps burst across the room. People shouted. Someone cried out. Hamdan turned to run. But something happened the second he stepped away from the altar. His foot slipped hard. The tray flew from his hands. The white wafers scattered across the marble floor. And Hamdan fell forward with a loud crash. The church went silent. No one moved. Hamdan tried to stand, but his legs would not work. He grabbed his chest with both hands. A sharp cry escaped his mouth. Farouk rushed forward, but before he reached him, something else happened. Behind me, Bilal let out a choking sound. When I turned around, he was on his knees, his face pale, his eyes wide. Then he collapsed forward onto the floor. 2 men, down, just like that. My mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. People stared in shock. The priest stepped forward slowly. Hamdan tried again to stand, but his arms shook. His body fell back against the marble floor. Farouk bent down quickly to grab one of the wafers. The moment his fingers touched it, he collapsed too. 3 men now lay helpless on the ground. My heart slammed against my ribs. This was not possible. This was not part of the plan. Fear crept into my chest, cold, sharp. And for the first time since I walked into that church, a thought crossed my mind that I did not want to face. What if the thing we came to burn was not just bread? What if something far greater than us was standing in that room? And the moment that question entered my mind, my own chest suddenly tightened and my knees began to buckle beneath me. My knees gave out before I even understood what was happening. 1 second I was standing near the altar, staring at the scattered white wafers across the marble floor. The next second, the strength left my legs like water draining from a bucket. My body dropped hard. My hands hit the cold floor first. The shock of the stone shot up my arms, but I could not push myself up. The room filled with sharp gasps. Someone cried out. A woman near the front covered her mouth with both hands. For a moment I thought maybe someone had pushed me, but when I looked around, I saw that no one was close enough. The nearest person stood at least 10 feet away. They were frozen in place, staring at us like we were part of a strange dream. My chest felt tight, not pain exactly, but pressure, like a heavy weight was sitting on my ribs. I tried to take a deep breath. The air came slowly, like breathing through a small straw. Farouk lay only a few feet away from me. His eyes were wide with shock. His arms trembled as he tried to push his body off the floor, but each time he lifted himself even a little, his arms shook and dropped him back down again. "What is happening?" he whispered. His voice sounded weak. Hamdan was still on the other side of the altar steps. He had rolled onto his back. His chest rose and fell fast, like he had just run a long race. Sweat covered his forehead, even though the church was cool. Bilal had not moved at all. He lay on his side, breathing slowly, staring at the ceiling with a look of deep fear. The scattered communion wafers lay across the marble floor between us. Some rested only inches from our hands. The priest stepped forward slowly. His shoes made soft tapping sounds against the marble tiles. He did not rush. He did not shout. He simply walked toward Hamdan and knelt beside him. "Are you in pain?" he asked quietly. Hamdan tried to answer, but his voice came out broken and weak. "I cannot stand," he said. The priest placed one hand gently on Hamdan's shoulder. "Stay still," he said calmly. "Help is coming." Someone in the church had already pulled out a phone. I could hear them speaking in a hurried voice near the back doors. 4 men collapsed. Yes, inside the church. Please hurry. My heart pounded harder. My mind raced for an answer. Maybe someone had sprayed something in the air. Maybe the floor had some chemical. Maybe it was stress. But deep inside, I knew something did not fit those ideas. The priest looked down at the wafers scattered across the floor. Then he turned to the people in the front row. "Please help gather the Eucharist," he said softly. 2 elderly women stepped forward slowly. They knelt carefully beside the scattered wafers. Their hands moved gently, picking them up one by one. The way they handled the bread felt strange to me, careful, reverent, like they believed it was truly something sacred. One small wafer had rolled close to my right hand. It rested only 3 inches away from my fingers. I stared at it, such a tiny thing, flat, white, light as paper. This was what we had come to burn. I tried to move my arm, my muscles shook, but the strength would not return. Fear spread through my chest, not loud fear, not panic, but a deep, quiet fear that sat like ice inside my stomach. The priest moved toward me next. He knelt beside me just like he had with the Hamdan. "Can you breathe?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes." "Can you move your legs?" I tried again. My feet twitched slightly, but I could not lift them. "No," I whispered. The priest watched me for a moment. There was no anger in his eyes, no blame, only concern. That confused me more than anything else. We had come to attack their sacred moment. We had tried to steal their communion. Yet he treated us like wounded strangers. More church members stepped forward now. They gathered the last of the wafers from the floor. One man brought a small gold bowl and placed them inside. No one shouted at us, no one tried to hurt us. They simply watched and waited. Minutes passed slowly. The pressure in my chest remained, but it did not grow worse. Still, I could not stand. Outside the church Shimtu doors, I heard the distant sound of sirens. The ambulance, the sound grew louder as it rushed closer down the street. Farouk turned his head slightly toward me. "This is not normal," he whispered. His voice shook. "I know," I answered. He swallowed hard. "Do you think someone poisoned us?" I wanted to agree with him. That would have made sense, but something inside me refused that answer, because I remembered the exact moment everything changed. The moment Hamdan grabbed the tray, the moment the wafers hit the floor, the moment Farouk touched one, the moment each of us tried to move closer. Every collapse had happened near that bread. The thought slipped into my mind slowly, quietly. What if the thing we mocked was not just bread? I pushed the idea away quickly. No, that was impossible. Yet the question refused to disappear. The sirens stopped outside the church. Heavy footsteps rushed through the open doors. Two paramedics hurried down the aisle carrying medical bags. A third pushed a stretcher. "What happened here?" one of them asked. The priest stood and pointed toward us. "They collapsed suddenly," he said. The paramedics moved fast. One knelt beside Bilal and checked his pulse. Another placed a small mask over Hamdan's face. The third came to me. "Stay still," he said calmly. He pressed two fingers against my neck and counted silently. My heart hammered under his touch. "Pulse is strong," he said. He shined a small light into my eyes. "Can you speak?" "Yes," I answered. "Any pain?" "No." He frowned slightly. "Can you move?" "Not really." The paramedic looked confused. "Did you eat anything strange?" he asked. "No." "Drink alcohol?" "No." He glanced toward the others. All of them showed the same strange problem. Healthy heart, clear breathing, but bodies that refused to stand. The paramedics exchanged quiet looks. One of them spoke softly to the priest. "We need to take them to the hospital," he said. The priest nodded. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, my head turned toward the altar. The golden bowl now held the gathered communion wafers again. The priest stood beside it silently. People in the church had begun to pray. Their voices were low, soft, peaceful. The stretcher rolled down the aisle toward the doors. Cold air rushed in as we passed outside. The sky was still gray. The bells above the towers were silent now. They lifted me into the back of the ambulance. The doors closed with a heavy thud. As the vehicle began to move, one thought echoed again and again inside my mind. What if our bodies had collapsed not because of sickness, but because we had tried to destroy something we did not understand? The ambulance doors slammed shut and the siren screamed to life. The sound was sharp and loud, cutting through the quiet morning like a blade. The vehicle jerked forward, and the city outside the small window began to blur past in gray and silver lines. I lay flat on the stretcher, strapped across my chest and legs. My arms rested at my sides, but they still felt heavy like sandbags tied to my bones. The paramedics sat beside me, watching a small screen that showed my heartbeat. Green lines jumped up and down with each beat, fast but steady. He looked confused. "You said you just fell?" he asked again. "Yes," I whispered. "Oh, you did not trip?" "No." "You did not hit your head?" "No." He frowned and looked at the screen again. Behind him, I could see the other stretcher. Hamdan lay there with an oxygen mask on his face. His eyes were open, but he stared at the ceiling without speaking. Farouk sat upright on a bench seat inside the ambulance. His arms rested on his knees, but his shoulders shook slightly. The paramedic spoke to him next. "Sir, can you stand now?" Farouk slowly tried to lift himself. His legs moved a little, then they gave out again. He dropped back onto the bench. "No," he muttered. The paramedic shook his head slowly. "I do not understand this," he said. The siren screamed again as the ambulance turned a corner fast. The lights outside flashed red and blue across the walls of the vehicle. My chest felt lighter now. The tight pressure had begun to fade. I tested my fingers. They moved slowly, but they moved. Something inside me felt strange. Not pain, not fear exactly, something deeper, like a quiet voice whispering in the back of my mind. The image of the small white wafer on the church floor kept returning to me, 3 inches from my hand, so small, so simple. Yet the moment we tried to take it, our bodies failed. I turned my head slightly toward Farouk. "Do you feel better?" I asked. He nodded once. "A little." Hamdan slowly pulled the oxygen mask aside. "I can breathe fine," he said weakly. The paramedic glanced at him. "Keep the mask on for now," he replied, "but your lungs sound normal." Again that confused look crossed his face, healthy, but unable to stand. The ambulance slowed as it pulled into the hospital entrance. The siren stopped suddenly, leaving a deep silence behind. The back doors opened. Bright daylight rushed inside. Hospital workers pushed the stretchers quickly through sliding glass doors. The smell of cleaning soap filled the air. White light sprays glowed from the ceiling. People in blue uniforms moved quickly through the halls. They rolled me into a room with several beds lined up against the walls. Curtains hung between them. A nurse placed a blood pressure cuff around my arm. Another clipped a small sensor onto my finger. Machines beeped softly around me. "Try to sit up," the nurse said gently. I pushed against the bed with my arms. This time my body lifted slowly, but it lifted. The nurse helped me sit upright. My legs dangled off the side of the bed. They felt weak, but not frozen like before. The nurse looked surprised. That is good," she said. "Can you stand?" 2 nurses held my arms as I carefully placed my feet on the floor. My legs shook like thin branches in strong wind, but they held. I stood there, breathing slowly. The weakness was fading. Across the room, I saw Farouk doing the same thing. Hamdan sat upright now too. Within 20 minutes, all of us could stand again. The doctors ran test after test, blood samples, heart checks, brain scans. Each result came back the same. Normal, no poison, no disease, no injury. One doctor rubbed his chin while looking at the results. "I cannot explain what caused the collapse," he said. "Maybe stress, maybe panic." But his voice did not sound confident, because none of us had been panicking. We had been moving calmly, focused, determined. The doctor eventually left the room. Hours passed. By late afternoon, the hospital allowed us to leave. We walked outside together in silence. The sun hung low in the sky now. Long shadows stretched across the parking lot. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, Hamdan broke the silence. "That was strange," he said quietly. Farouk nodded. "Very strange." Yusuf had joined us after being treated in another room. He leaned against the car and crossed his arms. "We embarrassed ourselves," he said. "We failed." His words hung heavy in the air, but that was not the feeling inside my chest. This felt like something else, something deeper. I looked at Farouk. "When exactly did you fall?" I asked him. He thought for a moment. "When I touched the bread." "And you?" I asked Hamdan. "The moment I grabbed the tray," he replied. And Bilal? He collapsed near the wafers on the floor. We all went quiet again. Each of us knew the same truth now. Every collapse had happened at the same moment. When we tried to touch the Eucharist, I swallowed slowly. Maybe it was a warning, I said. Farouk looked at me sharply. A warning from who? I did not answer right away, but the image of the church altar rose again in my mind. The golden tray, the white bread, the calm priest, the quiet prayers. Something about that moment felt different now. Not foolish, not weak, but powerful. Farouk opened the car door. We forget this, he said firmly. We move on. The others nodded. But as we drove away from the hospital, I looked out the window at the fading sunset. One thought kept echoing inside my mind. If that bread was only bread, then why did our bodies collapse the moment we tried to take it? The church doors opened slowly, groaning on their hinges, and a cold wind rushed inside. Dust swirled in the sunlight, streaming through the stained glass, painting the floor with reds and blues. My heart thumped loud in my chest, echoing against the stone walls. I tightened my grip on the small bag in my hands. Inside, the cloth covered something that had been untouched since that morning. I took a careful step forward. The floor felt uneven beneath my shoes. Each tile was cool, slick in some places, rough in others. The air smelled of wax and old wood, strong and familiar. Farouk followed closely behind me, his eyes scanning every corner. Hamdan stayed near the back, silent, fidgeting with the strap of his bag. The altar sat at the front, gleaming faintly in the light. The gold tray that held the wafers gleamed too, untouched since our collapse. I remembered the moment we had reached for it. The weight of it was not heavy, yet our bodies had betrayed us. My stomach tightened as I approached it now, careful, cautious. I knelt slowly, letting my knees touch the cool marble. I placed the bag on the floor beside me and untied the cloth. The contents revealed themselves. Small, simple wafers, identical to what we had tried to take before. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for one. The faint smell of baked bread rose to my nose. Nothing more, nothing strange, nothing dangerous. Then a sudden sound. A soft snap of wood echoed behind me. I spun quickly, heart racing. A shadow moved near the pulpit. Farouk had drawn a breath sharp and low. Hamdan stiffened. The silence returned after a long second, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. I swallowed hard and tried again. My hand hovered over the wafer. A flash of memory stabbed at me. The instant we had collapsed. The weakness, the panic that never came, the sensation that something unseen had stopped us. My fingers touched the wafer lightly. My hand froze. The warmth that had returned in the ambulance seemed to vanish, leaving cold dread behind. Farouk whispered, Do you feel it too? I shook my head slowly. I don't know. Hamdan stepped forward. We all fell at the same moment. Something is here. The words hung in the air, heavier than any stone. I looked around, searching for what he meant. The altar was still empty. The pews were still empty. The room felt silent, still. Yet the air felt thick, almost alive. My pulse sped. My throat went dry. I took a deep breath. Maybe it's not the bread itself, I said softly. Maybe it's what it represents. Farouk frowned, squinting at me. What do you mean? I knelt and placed the wafer back on the tray. I don't know fully. But some things stopped us before. And I think it's not about fear, not about strength, something more. Hamdan's eyes widened. More? Yes, I whispered. Something we cannot touch yet, something higher. The sun began to sink lower outside. Shadows stretched long across the floor, reaching like dark fingers. I could see each line of the tiles, each crack in the stone, every curve of the pews. The air itself seemed heavier, almost warm now, as if the room itself had a heartbeat. I stood slowly, careful not to disturb the wafer. Farouk and Hamdan mirrored my movement. Together we stepped back a few paces from the altar. We could feel the space between us and the wafers change somehow. The heaviness in the air shifted. Lighter, quieter. Not gone, just different. A gust of wind rattled the windows suddenly, making the stained glass chime softly. My stomach flipped. I looked down at the tray again. The wafers sat still. Nothing moved. Yet I felt an invisible weight pressing on my chest, a tension that had nothing to do with physical force. I bent down slowly, placing my hands lightly over the tray. Warmth, gentle and unthreatening, spread up my arms. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Hamdan and Farouk stepped closer, placing their hands beside mine. A quiet pulse seemed to ripple through the air, through the wafers, through us. I closed my eyes. The memory of collapsing returned, but now it felt different. Not fear, not weakness, but warning, guidance, something trying to speak without words, to teach without force. My mind struggled to understand. Farouk's voice broke the quiet. Is this real? I opened my eyes slowly. I don't know, I admitted, but I feel something more than we can see, something beyond us. Hamdan nodded, a tremor in his lips. We tried to destroy it, he whispered, and it protected itself. The three of us stood silently for a long moment. Outside, the sun touched the horizon, bathing the church in gold. Light passed through the stained glass, scattering colors across the marble floor. Every shadow, every ray of light felt alive, felt aware. I looked at Farouk and Hamdan. Our eyes met, each of us silently asking the same question. What had we encountered that morning? Something powerful, something real, something holy. I stepped back from the altar slowly. We need to understand, I said, but we also need to be careful. This is not something to take lightly. Farouk nodded. Do you think it could happen again? I swallowed. The question echoed inside me. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say no, but deep inside I knew the truth. Something was watching, something had stopped us once, and it could stop us again. The wind howled through the church doors, lifting dust and the scent of old wood. I shivered slightly. My hand still tingled from touching the wafer. The tension, the invisible weight, had not fully left. We turned toward the exit. Each step felt measured, deliberate. Outside, the city was quiet. The sun had nearly set. The air was cool on my face. And yet, I could not stop thinking about the altar, about the wafers, about the strange collapse, about what we had not understood. I asked myself quietly as we left the church, if something this powerful could stop us once, then why had it allowed us to leave alive? I stepped back into the church alone, the doors clicking softly behind me. The light from the stained glass was softer now, golden and calm, painting the floor with quiet colors. My hands still trembled from before, but this time it was different. Not fear, but awe. The air smelled of wax and old wood, warm, gentle, alive. I knelt before the altar, the wafers resting untouched, shining faintly in the light. I reached out slowly, touching one lightly. A warmth spread through my fingers, up my arms, settling in my chest. I felt a presence, not loud, not harsh, but steady and patient. My knees shook as if the floor beneath me was pulsing with life. I closed my eyes and let the feeling flow through me. It was forgiveness. It was warning. It was truth, beyond what I could see. Farouk and Hamdan appeared behind me, their eyes wide, silent. Together we felt it, an invisible hand guiding, holding, protecting. The collapse, the fear, the anger we had carried, all dissolved into something higher, something real. I whispered softly, "We cannot destroy what is sacred, but maybe we can understand it." And I knew then, the question remained, if this power had chosen mercy once, would it choose mercy again?